They would later replay the moment in their minds, over and over, wondering how the youngest-looking person in the entire Joint Operations Corridor became the comm center of a storm no one else saw coming. But in that first instant, when the fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the building was filled with the brisk energy of a training day, she appeared to most as nothing more than a misplaced civilian wandering into a place she didn't belong. If you believe people should never judge a warrior by the surface, then make sure to like and subscribe, because what happened next proves exactly why. It all began on a Friday morning at Camp Pendleton, the kind of morning where Marines in pressed camis moved with purpose between briefings, the clatter of boots and clipped radio calls echoing down the newly waxed floors. The Joint Ops building was buzzing with the rhythm of 100 coordinated agendas. Pilots going in and out of closed-door meetings, logistics officers hunched over tablets, and a hum of administrative urgency that came with prepping for a multi-branch night exercise. In the middle of all this, she walked in, a young blonde woman in her late 20s, calm, steady, unhurried, looking around as if she'd been here 1,000 times. But because she wasn't wearing a uniform that screamed rank or purpose, she became an immediate target of curiosity, and something far less flattering, from Captain Rowan Briggs, a Marine officer known more for his overconfident certainty than his situational awareness. He spotted her the moment she stepped through the security arch, raising his brows at the sight of someone who didn't fit neatly into his preconceived categories. Not a spouse, not a contractor he recognized, and definitely not a member of his unit. His lieutenants caught the look too, and that was all it took. The smirks began, the quiet snickers, the kind of condescending amusement officers sometimes wore when they believed themselves to be gatekeepers of a world no outsider could understand. She approached with a small visitor's lanyard in hand, though she didn't present it first. That alone seemed to irritate him. He stepped directly into her path with the forced politeness of someone trying to impress an audience. "Good morning, ma'am," he drawled, as if speaking to someone lost in a grocery store instead of a federal installation. "You look a little out of place. You sure you're in the right building?" She met his gaze with the kind of composure that made it feel like he was the one being evaluated. "I'm here for a briefing," she said simply. Nothing defensive, nothing apologetic, just a statement. That should have been the moment he reset, recalibrated, maybe even asked professionally who she was checking in with. Instead, sensing his lieutenants watching, sensing the stage lights of his own ego warming, he leaned in just enough to sound patronizing without crossing the line into overt disrespect. "Right? A briefing. And who exactly are you briefing?" The pause that followed wasn't awkward for her. It was awkward for him. She didn't scramble for an explanation or drop a name to earn credibility. She simply let the silence sit between them, which somehow rattled him more than any argument would have. He cleared his throat, his need to regain control turning his tone sharper. "Okay, let's try this another way." He put one hand on his belt, thumb hooked with easy arrogance. "Around here, everyone who belongs has a call sign. So why don't you tell me yours?" The comment was framed like a joke, tossed out loudly enough for nearby Marines to hear, a bit of peacocking meant to entertain his junior officers. They snickered exactly on cue. But she didn't. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't flinch, didn't counter with attitude. She just watched him, her expression unreadable. "I'm here for a briefing," she repeated, voice calm as a glassy lake. The simplicity of the answer insulted him, mostly because it wasn't the reaction he expected. It didn't confirm his assumptions or validate his joke. It didn't give him anything at all. So he pushed further, now shifting from playful to policing. "Ma'am, you need to tell me who you're meeting. This area is for authorized personnel only. If you can't provide that information, I'll need to escort you to PMO for verification." She didn't bristle. She didn't even sigh. If anything, she softened, not in weakness, but in something that resembled reluctant patience, like she had been through a version of this dance before. "Captain," she said quietly, "I assure you, I'm supposed to be here." He scoffed. "Right? And I'm supposed to be flying Space Force shuttles." More laughter from behind him. And still, she stayed steady, offering no visible irritation. The hallway continued buzzing around them, but the air between them seemed to thicken, tension blooming in the space the way storm clouds rise on a horizon. A master sergeant walking by slowed just a fraction, head turning as though something about her presence pinged a memory he couldn't immediately access. But the captain didn't notice. His world had narrowed to the woman he assumed was lying. Or worse, wasting his time. "Ma'am," he repeated, tone hardening, "your ID." Now. She reached toward the inside pocket of her jacket, and as the fabric shifted, a patch briefly became visible near her inner sleeve. Black and gray, serpent coiled around a blade. It flashed only for a heartbeat before disappearing again. But that split-second glimpse was enough to freeze the master sergeant mid-step. His eyes widened. His breath hitched. Recognition, pure, visceral recognition, struck his expression like lightning. He didn't even bother approaching. He turned on his heel, already pulling out his phone. The captain, oblivious, continued. "Look," he said, "we can keep this simple, okay? Just tell me who you're here for and what." She finally looked him fully in the eyes. Calm, steady, unblinking. "Captain," she said softly, "you should stop." The way she said it wasn't a threat. It wasn't defiance. It was a warning. A quiet, tired warning from someone who had absolutely nothing to prove, and yet had already proven more than he could imagine. But he didn't know that. Not yet. No one in that hallway truly understood what was about to happen. Not yet. Because the name, Ghost Viper, hadn't been spoken. Not until the moment everything changed. What happened next didn't unfold in a burst of drama, but in a subtle shift, like the quiet moment before tectonic plates snap. The master sergeant who'd frozen at the sight of her patch didn't run, didn't shout. He simply walked with an urgent, controlled pace that signaled only one thing to those who recognized it. Something significant was happening, and every second counted. He moved toward the end of the hall, phone pressed to his ear before the captain even realized anything had changed in the atmosphere. Meanwhile, Captain Briggs stood planted in front of her, mistaking the growing silence for his own authority settling over the corridor. He saw her calm expression, her steady breathing, and read all of it incorrectly. As if she were intimidated, unsure, maybe even embarrassed. He didn't understand that the calm belonged to someone who had stood in much darker places than a hallway lined with framed command photos and motivational posters. As he prepared to lecture her again, a strange ripple passed through the Marines nearby. Conversations faded. Heads subtly turned. The lieutenants behind him, once smirking and whispering, now sat up straighter as a faint wave of unease rolled through the space. The woman hadn't moved. She didn't need to. The building was moving around her. And that was when the captain made the mistake that would seal the moment into the memory of everyone present. He stepped forward, invading her space by an inch too much, as though proximity might force compliance. "Ma'am," he said sharply, "you're holding up official operations. If you don't tell me your call sign or who sent you." "Ghost Viper," she said. No emphasis, no dramatics. Just two quiet syllables. But they hit like a suppressed detonation. The lieutenants blinked. The nearest Marine stiffened. A young corporal walking by with a clipboard stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes darting from her to Briggs as though he'd just witnessed someone grab a cobra with bare hands. Briggs, however, scoffed. He thought she was joking. "Right?" he said sarcastically. "Ghost Viper. Sure. And I'm Maverick." But the reactions around him weren't matching his amusement. The hallway had gone strangely still. Boots slowed. Conversations died. A pair of aviators approaching from the stairwell glanced toward the exchange and froze as recognition dawned on their faces. First confusion, then shock. One of them whispered something that sounded like, "No way," and immediately pulled the other back. The captain didn't notice the shift, didn't feel the gravity beginning to pool. He pushed on. "All right, enough. Come with me. We're going to PMO to verify your..." The sentence didn't finish because at that exact moment, the distant hum of boots synchronized into purposeful rhythm. From down the corridor, a door swung open. A senior officer's voice, clipped, urgent, reverberating with authority, echoed faintly. Marines parted instinctively, forming space without needing to be told. And then came the unmistakable sound. A convoy door slamming shut just outside. The heavy thud of tactical boots hitting pavement, and the rising murmur that spread like wildfire. "Command team is coming. Something's happening. What's going on?" The captain stood frozen, his hand still half raised in a this-way gesture as the tension climbed. She didn't move. Her expression didn't shift. If anything, her eyes softened with an almost resigned sadness, like she had hoped, truly hoped it wouldn't escalate this far. Then the building seemed to inhale. A sudden silence fell over the entire corridor as three figures rounded the corner with a unified precision that only years of command and combat could produce. The base commander, the sergeant major, and a SOCOM liaison officer, whose presence alone could have cleared the hallway. They were not strolling, they were hunting. Their eyes were fixed on one person, and it wasn't Captain Briggs. Every Marine instinctually straightened too. Attention! Salutes shot up like reflexes. Even those not in uniform stiffened, sensing the weight of something far above their pay grade descending upon them. The commander reached the captain and the young woman in 3 long strides. He did not acknowledge Briggs. He didn't even look at him. Instead, he came to a halt directly in front of her, heels clicking together with a sound sharp enough to puncture the dead quiet. And then he saluted, sharp, reverent, unmistakably formal. Not the casual greeting of equal ranks. Not the polite courtesy given to visitors. This was the kind of salute given to living legends. Major Knox, the commander said, voice carrying through the hall with clear respect. Call sign Ghost Viper. Welcome to Camp Pendleton, man. Gasps whispered through the corridor. Someone actually dropped a binder. The lieutenants behind Briggs went rigid, faces draining of color. The captain himself swayed almost imperceptibly, as though someone had kicked the floor out from beneath his certainty. She returned the salute with quiet precision, her posture shifting with a controlled, effortless confidence that was unmistakably military. It was as if her entire presence sharpened in an instant, revealing what she had been the whole time. Sir, she said, voice steady. Thank you. I'm here for the brief you requested. The commander nodded and turned, only then acknowledging the captain with the kind of slow, deliberate head tilt that signaled impending professional catastrophe. Captain Briggs, he said, voice cutting through the air like a finely honed blade. You will report to my office immediately after this briefing, and bring a notebook. Briggs swallowed, throat working visibly, eyes darting between the commander and the woman he'd just attempted to detain. The sergeant major stepped forward slightly, his expression carved from stone. Sir, he said low. Should I remind the captain who Major Knox is? The commander didn't take his eyes off Briggs. Yes, he said. I believe he needs context. And so, right there in that hallway, in front of dozens of stunned Marines, the commander began to speak the legend Briggs had mocked only minutes earlier. The night mission, the crippled aircraft, the impossible landing, the special operations team whose lives were saved solely because the woman he'd condescended to refuse to leave them behind. As the story unfolded, Briggs's face shifted from confusion to disbelief to a slow, dawning horror. And when the commander finished, the hallway remained dead silent. Every Marine anchored in place by awe. Briggs looked at her like he was seeing a ghost, because without knowing it, he had been speaking to one the entire time. The silence after the commander's final words hung in the air like a suspended verdict, heavy and unmoving, as if the building itself needed a moment to process what had just unfolded. Major Knox stood in the center of that stunned stillness, not basking in it, not shrinking from it, but simply existing in a way that radiated quiet gravity, the kind carried by those who'd lived through scenes no hallway full of startled Marines could ever comprehend. Captain Briggs, who moments before had positioned himself as a gatekeeper, looked physically smaller now, shoulders slouched, jaw slack, his earlier bravado draining from him like water leaking through cracked stone. His face was pale, eyes wide with the realization that he hadn't just misjudged a visitor. He had attempted to detain an operator whose name traveled through classified channels like a whispered myth. But Major Knox didn't look at him with anger or triumph. She studied him with a patience so steady, so measured, it was almost disarming. It was the look of someone who had learned long ago that battles worth fighting were rarely won through ego. The commander gestured for her to follow, and the entire hallway shifted, splitting cleanly to form a path. Marines snapped to rigid posture not because protocol demanded it, but because reverence did. As she walked, boots clicking softly against the polished floor, the ripple of "ah" she left in her wake was unmistakable. And yet she carried it with a humility so natural it nearly made the reverent atmosphere surreal. This was a woman who had flown a burning bird through a hostile corridor to save lives, and she moved with the unassuming confidence of someone who had never needed to announce her worth. Briggs remained rooted where she had left him, watching her walk away with an expression that flickered between humiliation and something far more sobering. Respect. Raw, unfiltered respect. When she reached the end of the hall and paused to allow the commander and the SOCOM liaison officer to brief her on the operation she had been called in for, she glanced back at Briggs, not harshly, not dismissively, but with a kind of weary understanding. Her voice carried softly, but in the quiet of that corridor, every syllable landed like a stone. "Captain," she said, "most of the people who come through these doors have stories you'll never see on their uniforms. You don't have to know their names. Just give them the benefit of respect." Briggs swallowed hard, nodding with a sincerity that stripped away whatever pride had shielded him before. "Yes, ma'am," he managed, the two words almost cracking with the weight of truth behind them. I understand." The sergeant major, standing beside him like a stone sentinel, gave a small approving grunt, something halfway between a warning and encouragement. Knox didn't linger. She offered one small, knowing nod, then turned toward the operations wing, where the upcoming mission briefing awaited her. As she walked away, several Marines exchanged glances, quietly processing the moment they had just witnessed. Some had heard rumors of Ghost Viper from deployed friends. Whispers of a young pilot who flew with the precision of a surgeon and the nerve of someone who'd already accepted death and outmaneuvered it anyway. Others had never heard the name at all, but they understood now, without question, why those who had spoke it with reverence. The commander escorted her into the glass-walled briefing room, and before the door shut, Briggs caught one last glimpse of her profile illuminated by the overhead lights. Calm, collected, ready to step into yet another high-stakes role without hesitation. Then the door clicked, and she vanished from sight. The hallway released a collective breath, tension easing like a valve opening, and conversation slowly began to murmur back to life. But nothing returned to the way it had been. There was a new tone in the air now, a sharpened awareness, a reminder that not all warriors look like the posters in recruitment offices. Some appear as civilians at a glance, walking quietly through the world with scars no one sees and stories no one hears until the moment truth demands to be known. Briggs finally straightened, as if the weight of his embarrassment had settled into a lesson rather than a burden. The sergeant major clapped him on the shoulder, not gently, but not cruelly either. "Learn from this, Captain," he said. "Rank doesn't make you wise. Experience does. She's got more of it than most people twice her age." Briggs nodded again, slower this time, letting the words sink deep. He knew this wasn't an incident he could bury or laugh off later. It would be the story every lieutenant and staff sergeant on that floor would remember him for. But instead of resenting it, he found himself accepting it, maybe even valuing it. Because today he had been humbled by someone who didn't wield her achievements as weapons. Someone who carried the weight of service with grace he couldn't yet fathom. The corridor gradually dispersed as Marines returned to their duties, but the story, already growing wings, would travel far beyond that building before the day ended. By the time the sun dipped below the California hills, the whispers had solidified into legend. Ghost Viper was at Pendleton. And for those who had witnessed her arrival, the experience didn't just reshape their perception of one woman. It reshaped their understanding of quiet strength, unseen battles, and the truth that sometimes the most formidable warriors are the ones who don't need to prove anything at all.